As adult learners of a language, we often look at children with some degree of envy because they seem to be able to acquire languages so much more easily than us. Now, it's certainly true that they have some advantages. Obviously, their brains have more plasticity when they're young. That's simply a fact of life. And quite specifically, they're able to identify, to be able to differentiate between different sounds better than adults up to a certain age. That's got to help as well. So's the fact that they don't really have anything else to do other than learn languages. No one's asking them to go out to work, to pay a mortgage, or to get ready for a Zoom call with their boss. They don't have to do any of that. But one of the key disadvantages that an adult has when trying to learn a foreign language is the fact that they compare their progress in their target language with their mother tongue all the time. I do it when I'm trying to speak Spanish. I'm always aware that if I was trying to express myself in English rather than Spanish, I'd be able to do it better. So I always feel a little bit socially awkward when I'm speaking Spanish. So let's imagine for a moment that you want to tell a story in English. And this is a story about the time when you were in a department store and you got stuck in a lift with a basketball team and you had an attack of claustrophobia. Now, you're about to tell the story to some English speakers when suddenly you realize you can't remember the words for department store, lift, or basketball. And even though you have the word claustrophobia in your passive vocabulary, never in your life have you ever tried to pronounce it before. And so you're scared and you're thinking, if only I could tell this story in my mother tongue, obviously I'd be able to make it much more interesting and entertaining. So you have a choice. You either don't tell the story at all, or you try the best you can to muddle through, knowing that you're going to feel a little bit awkward, maybe a little bit embarrassed, and that you're going to get some things wrong grammatically. And you have this sort of sense of social fear. Now, there's a word for this in English. I is for inhibition. Inhibition, noun. Let's start with a definition. A form of embarrassment which prevents natural behaviour. So when you've got inhibitions, you don't feel that you can express yourself freely, and you feel constrained, and you feel socially awkward, and you feel embarrassed, in this case, about your level of English. And so rather than try to express yourself, you might choose to say nothing at all. There are some synonyms for inhibition in English. We've got self-consciousness, shyness, and social awkwardness. An inhibition is caused by a fear of what other people are going to think of us. And then that inhibition affects our behaviour. It prevents us from acting normally and from relaxing. And so a part of the process in learning a foreign language is getting over our inhibitions. When I'm speaking Spanish, I'm painfully, acutely aware that I speak with an English accent, and I've had to get over the embarrassment I have and simply practice speaking in Spanish. But it's not only speakers of foreign languages that have inhibitions. Let's take a look at a couple of example sentences that use the word. I'm not suggesting that he gets completely drunk, but maybe a drink or two would help him with his inhibitions. I think we've all heard stories about comedians, for example, who were terrified of their audience at the beginning of their careers and often used to have a couple of drinks before going on stage simply to relax themselves. Now, if it doesn't get out of hand, that's not a bad strategy for getting over their inhibitions. I'm not suggesting that he gets completely drunk, but maybe a drink or two would help him with his inhibitions. A second example could come from an actor's studio. Actors' warm-up exercises are as much about shedding inhibitions as they are about vocal training. Maybe you've seen that sometimes when actors are preparing before they start a rehearsal, they'll often make animal noises or perform guttural screams. Now, on the one hand, they're certainly warming up their vocal cords, but on the other, they're just getting used to express themselves in front of each other, and they're getting over their inhibitions. Actors' warm-up exercises are as much about shedding inhibitions as they are about vocal training. Now, the noun inhibition is closely related to the verb inhibit. Let's take a look at a definition. Inhibit, verb, to prevent something from happening or to slow it down. The verb inhibit has a number of synonyms in the English language, and here are just a few examples. We've got constrain, impede, obstruct, hinder, and stymie. Now, with the noun inhibition, we always use this in the context of social embarrassment, this psychological feeling that prevents us from acting naturally or the way that we want to. However, we can use the verb inhibit in a much wider range of different contexts. So let me give you a couple of example sentences. The lack of adequate capital was always going to inhibit the company's growth. So here we're saying that there's a company that couldn't grow as fast as it wanted to because it had been inhibited by a lack of capital, a lack of funding or investment, if you prefer. So there's nothing remotely psychological about this sentence whatsoever. The company has been constrained and hindered in its growth. The lack of adequate capital was always going to inhibit the company's growth. Or we could say, too much of a focus on grammar can inhibit our ability to learn a language. Sometimes I think it's all too easy to think of language learning as something that's academic. However, ultimately, a second language is just a practical skill. It's all about communication. Now, I'm not saying that grammar isn't important. Of course it is. However, if we retreat to those academic elements of language learning, we're not going to be communicating. And at the end of the day, a language is all about communication. Too much of a focus on grammar can inhibit our ability to learn a language. One of the ideas behind this series is that if you can learn one word in English, you can learn a bunch of others at the same time. So let's take a look at this group of 4 words. We've got inhibit, inhibited, uninhibited, and inhibition. So we've got the verb we've just been talking about, we've got 2 adjectives, and we've got inhibition, the noun, which is where we started. Now, of the adjectives, we've got inhibited. Now, someone who is inhibited has inhibitions. They don't feel that they can behave normally, that they feel restricted. They are concerned about what other people might think of them. Whereas uninhibited is the antonym. It's the opposite. So someone who is uninhibited is able to behave perfectly freely. They are not concerned about what other people are thinking of them. So let's take all of these 4 words and use them in one paragraph. The fear of committing errors inhibits adult language learners. Uninhibited students can progress faster than their inhibited counterparts because they can learn from, rather than live in fear of, their mistakes. Inhibitions are the enemy of progress. Now, I think this is true because when you learn a language, you have to take risks. Obviously, if you keep saying the same things over and over and over, you're not going to progress. So there are times when you're going to try to formulate, to create new sentences, not knowing whether you either have the vocabulary or the grammatical structures to finish them. But without trying, you obviously can't succeed. So I think there's something in this idea The fear of committing errors inhibits adult language learners. Uninhibited students can progress faster than their inhibited counterparts because they can learn from, rather than live in fear of, their mistakes. Inhibitions are the enemy of progress. So I want to finish up by showing you that the relationship between the verb inhibit, the adjective inhibited, and the noun inhibition is not unusual in the English language. So often we take a verb and we add the suffix ed to create the adjective, in this case inhibited, and then the suffix shun, ion, to create the noun inhibition. But there are lots of other examples of words and verbs that take this same form in the English language, and here's just a few. So for example, we've got confuse, confused, and confusion. So I could say that the new video referee rules in football confuse me. I am confused by the new video referee rules in football. The new referee football rules have caused confusion. So there you have the verb, the adjective, and then the noun. We've also got exhaust, exhausted, and exhaustion. Inform, informed, information. Repress, repressed, and repression. So I could say of someone that they repress their true feelings, or that because they don't express their true feelings, they are repressed, or that their failure to express their true feelings is an act of repression. Repress, repressed, repression. So there we have it. That was inhibition, something that I think we need to overcome if we're going to learn a new language. Because as adults, we're always going to be conscious that we're not as fluent and we don't have the depth of vocabulary in the language that we're trying to learn that we do in our mother tongue. So very easily we can fall prey to feelings of being self-conscious and awkward. But language learning should be something of a venture. We have to be more extrovert and less introvert when learning a new language. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Catch you on the next one.